couple years ago, I played Deus Ex Human Revolution on the PC, and on the whole, I really liked the game. It had really engaging gameplay, a fun, if not amazing, main character. And while I didn't love the story, I was still really interested in getting to the ending. In fact, one fateful night, I saved the game before going to bed, stopping right before what I thought would be the final level. I was excited and invigorated because the next day, I was going to beat Deus Ex Human Revolution. Or that's what I thought. Let's talk about the missing link. The DLC as a whole aimed to fix many of the mistakes found in the original Human Revolution's game design. From the ability to non-lethally take down the final boss, to giving you a choice at reconfiguring your praxis kits, the DLC really feels like a genuine effort to strip away what held back the already pretty good gameplay. But we're not here to discuss the gameplay of the missing link. We're here to discuss the story, and why it sucks! By the story, I'm not talking about the specifics of the plot itself, although those will come up. Instead, I'm talking more generally about how the missing link fits into the pacing of Human Revolution as a whole. So, how is Human Revolution paced? Unfortunately for our conversation today, there isn't really an accepted plot structure style for video games. There's nothing like the 3-act structure that you would find in a lot of movies, for example. So today, using my high expertise of I've played a video game, and my wild popularity with 97 subscribers, I'm going to propose a model for how Human Revolution's plot is paced. I want to make it clear that this is not a model that I think would work for every game. It might work for some, seeing Knights of the Old Republic as an example. But I'm using this less as a general, here's how video games are, and more just as a model to understand why the missing link is kinda trash. So, Human Revolution. For the most part, it's a pretty open game. You go to a place, you do some side missions, you do a main mission, you get a bug and you get caught in an endless loop where you just stare back and forth at a woman without saying a single word. It's not open world levels of free, but it's not like the game is rushing you along at its pace. You can hang around and do whatever you want for as long as you want. But all that freedom slowly narrows until it reaches what I call the choking point. This is the point in the game where the pace shifts from, do whatever you want whenever you want, man, to, no, you're gonna go to the plot now, please. Stakes are raised, side quests are removed, and unless you really like just running around in empty space, you're encouraged to race down the rest of the plot. The way I also like to think about this is kind of as a roller coaster or water slide ride. Up to this point, you've been going up small inclines and falling down, but you've been building for that big drop you know is coming at the end. And after building and building and building, and maybe meandering on smaller entertainment, you're ready to go down one straight drop. And you're gonna go all the way down. In other words, the choking point is the beginning of the end. And in Human Revolution, that's the second time you visit Hangshaw. And I think it's that way for a couple of reasons. Up until this point in the story, you've been running around with your tech buddy Pritchard and your ace pilot Malik, trying to solve the mystery of your mysterious missing ex-girlfriend, who you're totally over, by the way, and trying to figure out what's going on with the mysterious Bell Tower Corporation and the associated Illuminati. But by the second time you visit Hangshaw, while these mysteries aren't solved, they're on their way to being wrapped up. You don't know where your girlfriend is, but you know how to find her. You know that wherever she is where the Illuminati's doing their Illuminati stuff. And the only kind of unrelated threat, which is an anti-cyborg asshole and his cyborg assistant, has basically been neutralized. All the separate parts of the story are wrapping up and coming together in one singular location. And it's your job to get there, kick ass, and not deal with the fact that it's over, buddy. Adam, it's over. Let her go. The second thing that signals the beginning of the end is when the aforementioned ace pilot Malik gets shot down. And if you're doing pretty poorly like me at that point in the game, actually dies. But this is more important than just being a high-stakes story moment where a character might die. Malik getting shot down also has unspoken gameplay connotations, because up until this point, she's been the person who's transported you from hub world to hub world. And even though you couldn't actually freely go between hub world to hub world whenever you wanted, having her gone feels limiting. You recognize that you aren't gonna go to another crazy, wacky location to just solve part of the mystery. Wherever you go from this point has to be deliberate. And combined with the fact that the story is wrapping up, that means that singular location you go to is probably going to be the last. The last thing that Deus Ex does to get you running towards the end is to limit the number of side missions. Over the course of the game, you start with a fairly large amount of side missions, but as you go from hub world to hub world, this slowly decreases and decreases until the last side missions you can do are in Hangshot. After that, there's nothing. Once you leave, you're firmly placed on the story tracks. No more side quests, no more distractions. Deus Ex is done wasting your time. Except it's not. I want you to imagine something for a moment. I want you to imagine that you finally did it. You took that week-long cross-country road trip. On this trip, you've seen things you never thought you'd see before, and had experiences that will never be replicated. It's been an amazing time, and after this great trip, you're ready to go home. And about an hour out from your drive, you recognize that landmark that lets you know how to make it the rest of the way home. So you turn off your GPS, lean back, and get ready for the big wrap-up of this crazy adventure. The missing link is what would happen if, as soon as you turned off your GPS, a sign popped up saying, "Sorry, 4-hour detour ahead." Now this detour might have fantastic stops, and inspiring views, and amazing creatures like a land whale. But it doesn't matter how great the detour is, because at this point, I just want to go home. To use the roller coaster example I mentioned before, the missing link is a lot like what would happen if, after reaching the top of the roller coaster and just starting to go down, it just flattened out. Like, yeah, you still get to go the rest of the way down, but by that point, a lot of the momentum is just lost. The energy isn't there anymore because you're so detracted from the buildup. Because there has been buildup. The game has been teasing this confrontation with the Illuminati for hours and hours and hours and hours, and when we're finally able to get to it, it decides to take us on a semi-related journey in the ocean for 4 hours. I just want to finish your game, Human Revolution. Why are you making it so hard for me? But it is called The Missing Link, so maybe there's some critical plot reason that it's in there, right? Without going into detail, right before you play the Missing Link DLC, you've palled around a bit in Hangshot before finally figuring out where the big bad Illuminati research base is. And you hide yourself in a stasis pod that's sent the ship directly to the base. In the main game, you just go there, and it's 3 days later. Now, despite the fact that there is a 3-day gap, it doesn't really feel like there's any important information missing. But, maybe there's some really important character or world building stuff in the DLC. Maybe? No? No, there isn't. Your answer is no. Let me walk you through what you do in the Missing Link. You end up on the wrong boat, you go to a different Illuminati base, fight someone you've never met before and whose only connection to the story is, "I'm an evil triangle guy too!" Get a brief teaser for Mankind Divided, and are sent back on your merry way. The DLC literally ends with you getting put in a stasis pod that's about to ship to the big bad guy base, which, if you remember from 30 seconds ago, is exactly what you did before the DLC started. Hell, the game has the audacity to even mention that.
You want me to get inside another stasis pod? Last time I got in one of those things, it didn't go so well.
I know it's far from ideal, but frankly, your options are quite limited. Although, I suppose you could try swimming there.
The Missing Link DLC really is just a detour. It takes you on a completely unrelated path from the main plot, and then after 4 hours just plops you back where you began. Except the only difference is, by the time I'm back, all that energy I built up for the finale is gone. And I'm no longer excited to finish the game. I just want it to be done. Nah, I'm just kidding. I'm not gonna end on such a downer. As much as I love railing on the Missing Link DLC, and I do love railing on the Missing Link DLC, I want to do it for no reason. So let's take a look at why the Missing Link DLC failed, and how we can learn from it and good DLC for better uses in the future. So again, why was it that something as simple as where the Missing Link DLC was placed made me hate it so much, despite it being, on the whole, pretty okay? Well, I think 2 main reasons. The first is that it was completely unrelated to the main story, which, could be fine, But the second part is that it was placed exactly where the game wanted me to focus on the main story the most. Essentially, what Human Revolution did was spend a really long time saying, hey, I'm about to give you this toy, and at the last minute, take it away and say, no, you're gonna play with this other thing instead. Even if the other thing is acceptable, I'm still gonna be a little bitter, because I was really excited for that thing that you were gonna give me. But to be honest, placing 4 hours of unrelated content that the player has to do would be distracting at really any point in the story. And that's the big issue of story-based DLC. You've got to create something substantial, while also not creating something so necessary that players who don't have the DLC will feel left out. And while there are many ways to do this, there are 3 models in particular that I really like. The first one's the mini prequel or the mini sequel, and in my opinion this one's the easiest. You just ignore the main game outright, create something that you plop either right before it or right after. Now admittedly this might cause problems if in the future you want to do a full prequel or a full sequel, but DLC like Shovel Knight Spectre of Torment and Bioshock Infinite Burial at Sea show that mini prequel or mini sequel DLCs can be really full, complete campaigns and stories in their own rights. Although I do want to clarify that even though I think these DLCs are complete, that doesn't mean that I think Burial at Sea is any good. One day I'll get to you. The second is to do a DLC that follows the main story but just changes the point of view. While this doesn't always work for movies, the novelty of being able to play the same thing over again as a different character, or dare I say the antagonist, is usually enough to make these stories fun and enjoyable. But even though the mini sequel, mini prequel, and the change in point of view are both fun, they don't answer the question of how you take a substantial amount of DLC and put it into an already existing story. For that, you make the DLC a side quest. Now I do want to mention that this DLC does come at a cost, as players who have already gone through the campaign but don't want to play it again won't be able to enjoy the DLC. But for everyone who's comfortable replaying the game, or for anyone new to it, side quest DLC can not only just add to the amount of stuff you're able to do, but it can help create improvements in the base game as well. My example for this is XCOM Enemy Within. XCOM Enemy Within was a giant DLC overhaul of the base game XCOM Enemy Unknown. And while it added in a lot of things, such as giant robot soldiers, its biggest addition is the enemy class Exalt. In XCOM, it's your job to wipe out those pesky alien invaders. But Exalt was interesting, as they were a human group that was interested in taking the alien technology and using it for their own nefarious gains. It was a new and interesting angle, showing a different and less overt kind of threat. And the gameplay additions were great as well. Instead of replacing the main missions in XCOM, the Exalt missions were just a new addition. Every so often you would send a soldier out to an Exalt base, and then you'd hear back from them and have a completely different kind of mission with a new and engaging type of enemy. To be honest, if I wasn't told that they were DLC, I would have never have noticed. Because the missions were portioned out in small chunks, and the Exalt missions went alongside the main story, as opposed to just halting it partway in between, Exalt felt like a critical and important part of the Enemy Within world. If Enemy Unknown had placed the final Exalt mission right in front of the final mission of the game, unlike Deus Ex, I wouldn't have rolled my eyes. I would have gotten excited, because taking out that giant secondary threat would have been this great, invigorating victory that would have propelled me towards the finale. And that's not speculation here. That's exactly what they did in XCOM 2, and it was amazing. But Kyle, I hear you saying, Deus Ex and XCOM, they both got X's, but besides that, they're completely different games. You can't take one type of DLC and just slap it on the other. And I hear ya, but I think it could still work. Because at its core, what is The Missing Link about? Well, it's about a crazy guy who's stealing people for his experiments. That could be done in such an interesting way. Imagine if instead of just meeting this guy and wrecking him in the same encounter, you had been dealing with him the entire game. You had been taking brief asides to follow missing persons cases or shutting down small illegal research facilities. If this guy had been a pain in your neck the entire game, not only would beating him just feel really, really good, but doing it right before the final encounter of the game would have felt like finishing off that appetizer you've been teasing around with before really digging into the main course. But as I said, those are just my ideas. There's a lot of ways to do story DLC wrong, And there are a lot of ways to do them right, much more than the 3 ways I mentioned. This video wasn't intended to just tell you this is how you do story DLC. Instead, I just encourage you, if you have a story that's pretty well paced as is, but you really want to add something to it, be considerate of what you add and where you add it.
A fading neon gleam casts shadows over stone. The city's shining skin is shedding from the bone.